Everyone knows Brian, but regardless, I'm going to give him an introduction anyway.
Use the microphone!
Yes, I will use the microphone. Good morning. My name is Jylik Buissereth, for those of you that may not know me, and I am a second semester senior. Today I have the amazing opportunity to introduce Brian Stelfreeze, an individual who has worked on projects for both DC Comics as well as Marvel over his vast career. Stelfreeze has worked... Yeah, no, it's pretty something Marvel. When I was doing the research, I was like, wow, that's pretty insane. Stelfreeze has worked at over 50 cover illustrations for DC's Batman Shadow of the Bat and has produced much more, such as his Eisner Award-Nominated work as the artist on the 2016 revival of Marvel's Black Panther with writer, I apologize if I say this wrong, Ta-Nehisi Coates. At this point in his career, his focus is acting as the art director for 12-page comics, whom he has provided interior artwork for on titles like Gun Candy and Ice. Allow me to welcome to you all painter, penciler, inker, and colorist Brian Stelfreeze.
Like I mentioned earlier, one of the coolest things and one of the most frightening things is I don't ever plan any of this stuff. I just kind of get up and start kind of talking, and I want you folks to kind of participate in this whole thing as much as possible. But the reason why I'm here is because I was you guys. You know, I was exactly like you. I was at an art school, just desperate for knowledge, wanting to do comics, wanting to do illustration, wanting to do animation. Hey, how's it going? So it's like I got incredibly lucky in that I met up with a bunch of really cool teachers that kind of like put me on the tracks. And I got a job working at an illustration studio with a bunch of old gray-bearded guys that really kind of taught me everything that I know about illustration. And one of the coolest things that they did was they taught me how to think about illustration. So now that I'm an old gray-bearded guy, I'm trying to kind of pay those guys back by passing on as much of the stuff that I learned from them to you guys. So this weekend, or this week, I want you guys to take as much advantage of me as possible. I want to look at some portfolios. I want to do a little bit of everything, because sometimes that's all it takes to kind of like get you guys going. You know, working in illustration has been absolutely awesome. You know, working in comics has been absolutely fascinating. I come from kind of a storytelling kind of background. A lot of my uncles, my mother, a lot of my family are just storytellers. So I grew up, you know, from a storytelling community. So the fact that I can actually do that is just the coolest thing in the world. One of the things that I always try to think about as a storyteller is we all have these questions. You know, I mean, if you're a storyteller, if you're in art school, or if you're studying poetry, or if you're trying to learn music, chances are you have a problem. Chances are you have a thing that you want to get out there. You've noticed things that are weird, or you're incredibly weird, or something, and you want to say something about it, or you want to do something about it. And art and animation and illustration kind of allows you that opportunity to sort of get that stuff out there. I mean, I oftentimes struggle with seeing something and going, do other people see this? Do they see what's going on here? And I use my illustration work to point that out. You know, if I think something is wrong or unfair, I can point that out in my illustration work. And the cool thing about it is I get the ability, like the coward I am, to hide behind it. You know, I can say and I can do like incredibly things. I can convince you of something that you might be totally against with my illustration, because you don't see me, you see my work. You know, and you judge the work. You don't judge the viewer. So if I were to come up to you and make a statement, you're going to actually go, oh, wait a minute, I'm looking at you first. So, not problem, man. But like through illustration, I can do and I can say whatever I want. I can convince you. You I can have that communication. And as a student, I think the most important thing that you have to do here, when you jump into an institution of learning, as a student, I think you often falsely are looking for an answer to the question of how. How do I do this? How do I paint? How do I illustrate? How do I animate? How do I use acrylics? How do I use watercolors, pencils, whatever? But I think the most important thing that you can start doing is understand that how is actually the follow-up question. Why is the question? That's really what you want the answer to. And all your instructors and all the people that you'll ever meet and everything, every question that you have should start with why. And for me, as an example to this, the reason why I do comics is because I have much more complex stories to tell. The reason why I do illustration is because sometimes I like to show off. So these are completely different things. When I get hired as a cover artist to do something, my job is to stop you. My job is to hold you in place. My job is to make you pick out the cover that I'm doing over all the other covers on the magazine rack or in the comic book rack. So I'm going to use different tools. I'm going to do different things to make you stop and make you marvel at this image, and then drive you inside the comic book. But when I'm doing interior pages, I do something completely different. I don't paint interior pages because if I painted an interior page, you'd stop and you'd look at a panel and go, whoa, that's awesome. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to bounce off of that panel to the next panel, to the next panel, to the next panel. So constantly asking yourself, why? Even little things like saying, how much detail do I put into this panel? How much detail do I put into my style? If you first ask yourself the question, why? As a comic book artist, you're not drawing pictures. As a painter, you're painting pictures. But as a comic book artist, you're actually drawing experiences. And every piece of art that you do should be an experience. One of the things, the stories that I often tell is, if I'm going to have a talk with you, and you walk up, and we talk for hours, and then you walk away, and you had to draw that in 3 panels, how would you draw those 3 panels? If you walked up to me, and I was busy, and I said, get out of here, kid, and then you walked away, how would you draw that in 3 panels? Because the experience would be totally different. But one of the things that I would think of is, if I was talking for an hour, I would start noticing the background. I would start noticing the people around me. I'd start noticing different things if I experienced an hour in one space. So that's what I draw. I would draw all of that information. But if I walked up and someone said, "Ah!" I wouldn't even see the background. I would just see their big face going, get out of here. So that's what I would draw. So everything that you do has to be answered by why. I talked earlier about having a realistic style versus a cartoony style. That, again, is the question why. Why do you want to draw something cartoony as opposed to why do you want to draw something realistic? Something that really took me out when I experienced this is I had a conversation with Mike Mignola, and it was late in a bar one night. I'm talking to Mike Mignola, and I started asking him about his art, and he actually said, what I want my stuff to feel like when I'm doing Hellboy is I want it to feel like opera. I want it to be just these big operatic stories. The sort of stuff that I see when I watch opera or a Broadway show. And then I walked away from that conversation and I started thinking about it, and I was just like, oh man, that's kind of interesting, because with an opera, you can't see the details of the people's faces. So Mike Mignola doesn't draw the details of the people's faces. That's kind of cool. With an opera, you can't see beautiful, detailed anatomy. So Mike Mignola doesn't draw beautiful, detailed anatomy. Most of his characters are just based on shapes. With an opera, it's on a stage, so you don't have perspective. Mike Mignola doesn't draw perspective. I'm like, man, I've wasted all this time learning all this stuff. Whereas if my story, if what I wanted to achieve was operatic, that means I would never have to learn any of that stuff. So even what you learn here in school has to be placed against the question of why. And that should determine what you need to learn, what you don't need to learn. So you might be wasting your time with perspective and anatomy and all that stuff, unless that's your story. If your story's about that, then you need to learn all that stuff. And again, I had a really cool conversation with a studio mate, Jason Pearson. And Jason Pearson and I were out one night, and Jason said, you know what? The human body can't withstand the action that I want to put it through. And I was just like, well, okay. And he said, so I'm going to start drawing things a little bit more distorted, a little bit more cartoony, to get the energy that I want on the page. And he started doing it, and it made his stuff a lot more energetic than it was before, even though he was doing beautifully realistic stuff before. So he was answering the question of why with the answer of how. And that made his work have a lot more energy. That made his work achieve much more than doing it realistic was. And once I started learning this, I started looking at other people's stuff. And I started looking at Jim Lee's stuff. And Jim Lee, in my opinion, is one of the greatest action comic book artists of all times. His stuff just looks active. His stuff just looks energetic. And then I started kind of thinking about it, and I was just like, Jim only draws 5 different faces. You know, and all the guys that he draws are the same guy with different hairstyles. and all these things that I used to think about as, well, that makes him not as good, actually makes him better, because you recognize the people faster, not because of all the nuances on their faces. You recognize it because, well, that's Batman, because he has the widow's peak. That's Clark Kent, Superman, because he has the S-curl. You recognize the characters faster, so your reading becomes faster. He doesn't challenge you with super detailed and unique anatomy or anything like that. He only draws iconography that you read instantly and move on to the next page. So his lack of what I would recognize as quality in a drawing actually ends up helping the drawing out, because he's answering the question of why, rather than getting stuck in the fidelity of how, which is really, pretty awesome. And the studio mate of mine, Adam Hughes, man, that guy can draw. I mean, he is just an outstanding illustrator. And it's really cool to then talk to Adam and find out the stuff that he's interested in expressing. And his drawings are the best tool that he has to express what he does. So I think all of you need to make that consideration. Make that consideration of, what is the story that I want to tell? How dynamic, how loud, how quiet, what is it that I wish to achieve with my art? And now, let me figure out from there what I need to do. Because the way that I see it, medium, pencil, acrylics, watercolors, all of that stuff is an alphabet. Whether you choose this medium or that medium is purely alphabetical. But then you go to technique, and technique is just a vocabulary, just learning a vocabulary. Knowing how to do this technique versus this technique doesn't really mean anything. It's just words. But then when you move into combining those techniques with storytelling, that's when it becomes a language. And the language is about communicating your ideas. The language is about actually getting those complex ideas, getting those things that you feel out there. And the awesome thing about that is all of you, because you're here, you have a personal style. You have a personal thing that you want to say. And I used to think that you get the job because you're really good at drawing, or you're really good at coloring, or you're really good at animating. But every job that you get has nothing to do with that. Every job that you get is because of your storytelling style and how consistent your storytelling style is. So when you, and this might be a thing that goes against some of what you learned in school, but I believe that it's not a good idea to show an editor that you can do everything. You know, when you show an editor that you can do everything, and you have to understand, editors are not very smart. You know? they're not very sharp people, and editors generally tend to be English majors, so they tend to not be good at art, and they don't know the difference between Rob Liefeld or Adam Hughes. So trusting an editor to know good art from bad art is actually the worst thing that you can do. But if your art has a story to it, if you're delivering a mood, if you're delivering a feeling, if you're delivering a type of story consistently, and that can be based on genres. If you're good at action, you know, if you're good at drama, you know, if you're good at horror with your artwork, if the editor notices that, you get the job very easily. But if you can show that you can do anything, then you're depending on this English major to figure out what to put you on. And so I understand that all of the jobs that I get are based on what I am capable of delivering consistently. So if you are going to a Batman editor and you show that you can do dark, mysterious action, you got the job. If you go to a Batman editor and show that you can do anything, when that Batman editor has a job that requires anything, maybe they'll hire you. You know, so really think about the consistency of the story. Really think about the genre that you're into, that you have fun with. A lot of times what I say is compare yourself to a director. You know, are you a Steven Spielberg? Are you like a Michael Bay? You know, sort of, are you, you know, just what type of movie would you like to do? And you will get that type of job doing comics. That to me is fun, because that means you're going to get the job that you want. The Care Bear editors are not going to call me. The editors that do Barbie comics are not going to call me, which is awesome because I don't want their phone calls. You know, the thing that's cool also is, for me, after careful observation, I realized that what I'm kind of into is I'm into deception. I'm into action, but things being different beneath the surface. And I always try to do characters that have contrasting looks. And what's really cool about that is, that's Batman. That's Black Panther. You know, when you have a king, but there's stuff going on in his kingdom. You know, when you have a millionaire who dresses up like a bat and terrorizes people. You know, that's like, there's a difference between what's going on the surface and what's going on underneath. You know, I'm fascinated by film noir and things like that. So the Batman guys love me. So I get the call to do Black Panther. But when they're going to do a Black Widow, you know, sort of story, they want me to handle that because that stuff fits into my storytelling style. I can draw the hell out of Superman, but the Superman editors will not call me because Superman doesn't have something dark and gritty underneath. Superman is absolutely pure awesomeness, and that's it. So the editors of Superman won't give me a call, not because I can't draw Superman. So it's not about the quality of my art. It's actually the consistency of the story that I tell. Except for one time, I get a call from the Superman editor. And I know the guy, I've met him at conventions, I've talked to him on a regular basis. He never calls me. But I get a call from him, and I'm like, Eddie, what's up? And he's just like, yeah, we'd like for you to do some Superman stuff. And I'm thinking, this is weird, you know? And he says, yeah, we're doing a Halloween story, and it's the nightmare issue of Superman, where Superman's like, you know, sort of darkest dreams come true. And I was just like, oh, so you can't get the Boy Scouts to draw that. I was like, so now you're going to call in the Dark Avengers to handle that stuff. So that's the cool thing about it is the moment that you get excited about your own story, the moment that you're desperate to get your own story out there, and you consistently are able to do that in your work, that's when these editors are going to get excited about what you're capable of doing. You know, so don't chase the lines, don't chase the perfection of anatomy, don't chase all that stuff. Really make a consideration as to what is it that you want to do with your artwork, you know? I mean, you know, are you different in a way, you know? Or do you have something, you know? Is there something about your race? Is there something about your gender that you wish to get out there? Put it in your art. You know, make those statements, you know, sort of in your art. Is there a political statement that you want to make? Put that in your art. And that's what's going to get people excited about what you do. And if you go to the Aquaman editor and you deliver stuff that feels like Aquaman, they're going to give you the job, you know, right away. So that's the thing that I think as a student, you want to learn strategies on chasing that, you know. And I think the bigger picture for me is, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, is perception hacking. That's the most awesome thing about doing illustration work, is just like a computer hacker hacks into a computer and gets that computer to do what it wants. That's the job of storytellers. You know, that's what we do. The wacky thing about it is I believe that we are a life form that actually pays more attention to storytelling to the point where we no longer evolve. We prefer story over truth. We prefer story over reality. And the strangest thing is we prefer story even over our own survival. Religion is based on story. Team loyalty is based on story. Politics are based on story. I mean, the most awesome thing is watching the last election, which was just exciting as hell. But I realized, you know, one of these people are much better at telling really simple stories than the other person is. And that person is probably going to win. Even though the other person was quoting facts and all that stuff doesn't matter. What's really amazing about story is, in my opinion, I think millions of years ago, two cavemen were walking down a path, and then a saber-toothed tiger jumped out and killed one of them. The other one ran back to the village and said, there be saber-toothed tigers on that path. Don't go down that path. Everyone in the village who went down that path died. So the only people that are left in the village are the people that listened to that story. And then one of those people said, hey, you know what? If you skin that animal and put on its skin, you will live through the winter. Everyone that did that lived through the winter. Everyone that didn't died. And I believe this has happened over and over and over and over again. All these different stories of how to survive. And people listened to those stories, and they did survive. So now, we are a creature based entirely on stories. So if I tell you a story, and that story catches you, you will listen to that story more than you'll listen to reality. It was a story that caused people to fly planes into buildings. You know, it is a story that sometimes caused people to survive cancer. It's all storytelling. That's how powerful, you know, what you do is. So that's the thing that I try to pay attention to. This is some awesome stuff, and you can use it to draw Batman. You know, but if you want, you can use it to stop someone from being a racist. That's like absolutely amazing to have that ability. And I think that's the cool thing that you all should be chasing. You know, that's the fascinating thing to me. You know, and I'm like some poor black kid from the most uneducated part of South Carolina you can imagine. But there are people in Des Moines, Iowa, reading my stories that have never met me and will never meet me, but they're moved by the things that I have to say. And I find that to be absolutely fascinating. You know, the fact that I can move those stories, I can put those stories, I can put those opinions in sort of out there. And everything that I do is about that why. It's about that itch that I have to scratch. It's about that, I'm going to use Batman, I'm going to use Oracle, I'm going to use all these other characters, but I'm going to try to express myself with this. And the more consistently you do it, the more people pay attention to you, and the more editors give you jobs. And that is my favorite part of being a storyteller. And by the way, if you have any questions or anything like that, jump in there. Yeah.
Can you just say more about what you mean that we hold the story more important than our own evolution, our own survival?
Yeah. Like that's the thing is let's take for example the military. You know, if you become a soldier, you know, you are just super indoctrinated, you know, so into this like, you know, some patriotism and all of this stuff, and man, you've got to rah, do it. Soldiering is kind of dangerous, you know, and it would be better for you to just kind of hang out at home. You know, that would much more guarantee your survival. So, story, if you believe the story, and it doesn't matter if the story is true or not, what you're going to do is you're going to go, you know what, me doing this, even though I'm probably going to die, is better for the greater good. So, that story is getting you to value that story, value what you're going to do over the reality of the fact that you might die doing this. You know, so that's how powerful that is. You know, people sacrifice themselves based on story. So story trumps survival. Story, to me, as far as humans are concerned, trumps everything. So that's like the coolest part of being a storyteller is you can be a storyteller to entertain, but you can also be a storyteller to move. And you can do both at the same time. Yeah. So that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
I know you're not a big fan of the snow, so I'd really like to thank you for coming out.
Snow business.
What's something that even now, you know, maybe it's a new challenge for you, but something that challenges you, maybe using like, maybe you should use these characters kind of like tools to express yourself. Do you have like something that you find very difficult to express these characters?
Well, that's the reason why I'm still doing this. I mean, that's the like as an illustrator, I found that I was chasing fidelity. When I got a job at the illustration studio, I got a job because I was the airbrush artist that could do realistic stuff. And it was kind of, I took pride in this, but I could airbrush something more realistic than a photographer could take the picture. So I was just like, yeah, sort of, but like, it didn't have any meaning whatsoever. And I would do a hyper-realistic drawing of, a Coca-Cola bottle, which would be in an ad, and someone would just kind of go, yeah, another ad, yeah. And, that doesn't do anything for my arrogance or ego. So doing storytelling, purely for storytelling, not to sell soap or anything else, but doing story just for story, that's what got me into doing comics. And now, that's the thing that I think is a lot of fun, and even with Black Panther, because of the area that I was from, there were some things that I thought were very different but very cool, just like really raw technology, and there was a sense of community there that I thought was really interesting. And with Black Panther, that gave me the opportunity to kind of go, organic tech is a thing. That's a really cool thing. Just because it's not computers and hard-edged and metal and printed circuit boards, that doesn't mean it's not advanced. And that was my kind of way of expressing that in different ways. So the way that Ta-Nehisi and I built the society was really kind of us kind of going, okay, we are from these oddly humble beginnings, but we kind of want to honor that a little bit by saying, this is kind of cool, So doing Black Panther was a really cool way of doing that, and also it was kind of interesting because, like, the area where I'm from, there are just some of the weirdest looking faces, sort of some of the strangest looking people, and like all wacky shades of black that you can imagine, and growing up in that was kind of cool, and I wanted to express that in a comic book, and not that takes away from Batman or saying one is greater, one is lesser, but I wanted to express some of what I grew up in and some of what Ta-Nehisi grew up in a comic book, and it was really cool to kind of like share that, and the editor was like really awesome because it was, Ta-Nehisi and I kind of got together and we would do stuff where we're like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we do? Ooh, but what would Dad say? And we contact the editor, and the editor kept kind of going, hey, go for it, guys, do whatever you want, So we just kept doing all of this stuff, and it was like so much fun. And it was so much fun to not only explore the story of the book, but to explore the storytelling. And I think those are two completely different things. I think art is a thing that's awesome, and I think story is a thing that's awesome. But both of those things are tools. Art is a wrench or a hammer or a screwdriver. Story is the thing, storytelling. And one of the things that I always liken this to is when you learn something in school, that's a tool. That's you learn perspective, that's a tool, you put that in your toolbox. You learn color theory, put that in your toolbox. You learn how to paint with acrylics or oils, put those in your toolbox. But when you get to storytelling, what you have to do is you have to go, okay, in order to tell that story, which of these tools do I need to use? So it's like, okay, well today I've got to do some plumbing. So I can take all the carpenter tools out and just leave the plumbing tools and let me go fix the sink. I think the problem with art with being an art student sometimes is you can get obsessed with like tool polishing. You know, I think, and this is kind of macabre, but Japanese sword making fascinates me. You know, and one of the interesting things about Japanese sword making is you smelt metal from ore, and that's awesome. Just being able to do that, and I liken that to sketching. Just getting this thing from nothing and turning it into something that you can use. And there are people that do that for the rest of their lives. They don't do anything else but just sketch while they're on the phone or whatever, and that's fine. But that's not storytelling. And then after you do that, you must hammer that metal to the point where it's pure iron. And I liken that to learning to draw. And you can do that for the rest of your life. But that's not storytelling. It's still a tool. And then after you do that, you can hammer it into shape and get it perfect where it is a perfect cutting tool. And I liken that to learning how to finish your work, sort of learning how to ink. And then you learn how to sharpen and make the handles. And I liken that to coloring and all that stuff. But that's not storytelling. But you do have a knife. And it looks awesome. But you're not storytelling. You're basically holding a beautiful looking knife. What storytelling is going out and murdering people. Because that's what it's for. It's not to be hung up on a wall so people can look at it and go, oh, wow, that's beautiful looking. No, it's actually a tool to murder people with. And once you get to the point where you do that, you do not think about the smelting, you do not think about the hammering, you do not think about any of that stuff. You make a career of racking up bodies. and that I find sort of fascinating. So all of the stuff that I've learned along the way is just tools for me to get to the storytelling. And that's the part that I find fascinating. That's the part that oftentimes takes me backwards, is when I get an illustration assignment and I'll stop and I'll go, okay, I can just do it. I can just jump in there and I can do this illustration assignment because I kind of know what I'm doing. But what I try to do is I try to stop and go, but that's what I want. What does the illustration want? What is it that I have to do for the illustration? Who do I have to become as a storyteller to tell the best story possible? And that's when I start going, you know what? I've heard about this goat milk paint called caseins. Maybe that will give me the effect that I want. Maybe that will tell the story that I want. So that's when I start really going off the deep end, or I start researching some arcane sort of medium or some arcane method, or I start bringing in the computer and printers and all sorts of other stuff. It's like, what story do I have to tell with this illustration? And that what ends up being fun.
Finding out that we both grew up in the Carolinas is
Oh, sorry about that.
I know. Growing up in the South Side.
But we're out. We made it.
I wanted to know more about how you grew up in the South, because obviously we come from very different backgrounds.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, what part of South Carolina?
I'm not actually South Carolina. I'm North Carolina.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh. You fancy North Carolina people.
We have to share.
Yeah. I grew up in a place called McClellanville, South Carolina, which is just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So, and you remember Forrest Gump, the movie?
Absolutely.
Bubba Gump represented all the people of McClellanville, South Carolina. he was like them all, So yeah, and the neat thing about growing up in South Carolina is, it's like, and I think all of you, if you're interested in storytelling, you have this kind of raised by wolves kind of thing going on, where it's just like, I got something to say, and you people don't really seem to be as agitated about this as I am. So you pursue a career in music or art or whatever to kind of get that thing, sort of out there. And I was like that in South Carolina, where I was just like constantly like looking around going, surely this can't be it. And my dad was military. And what ended up happening was we moved from South Carolina to Oklahoma. And I was just like, oh, okay. This is better, but I wish they were people. And I was just like, because I do have something to say, and I'd like to say it to people. And then from there we moved to Colorado, where I believe at the time we were the only black family in the state. So that was like a little weird, but better, and then eventually we moved to West Point, New York, and I was just like, oh yes, now we're talking. So it was like this, great, like seeing the world and actually talking to people of different races and different cultures, and that was just so much fun. And then we moved back to South Carolina. Sort of for my like high school, I finished it in South Carolina. And I was just like, okay, the first chance I get, I am out of here. But the area where I'm from, if you're from North Carolina, you're familiar with Gullah people. My family was a Gullah family, and the Gullah people were a group of freed slaves that sort of kind of went, you know what, we're out of here, and they moved to an island off the coast of South Carolina, and they kind of went, well, this is as close to Africa as we're going to get, so we'll just kind of settle here for a little while, and they sort of chilled out on the island while time passed by, and then a few of them started moving off of the island. And the ones that moved off the island moved into places like where I'm from, McClellanville. So they have a very specific patois to the way that they speak. It sounds almost kind of, even though they're Americans, they sound very Jamaican, very island. And if you spoke to my brother, you'd think, oh, well, he's Jamaican. So it's really kind of cool, but a lot of that sort of griot African storytelling comes from that culture, and I grew up in that culture, and I was like as desperate as possible to get away from it, and the moment that I got away from it, I became fascinated by it. So now I kind of always ask my grandmother and my mother, sort of questions about like, sort of the history of the place. Because it wasn't until I didn't have it that I realized, oh, well, that's kind of where I'm from. And a lot of what I do comes from there. Yeah.
And I hate to say it's probably the last question. We've got classes coming right in. But,
Okay.
Yep.
Last one.
I was wondering if you had any advice for finishing a project, because I find myself with comics specifically, I have a problem where I get a certain point and then I think I could tell the story better.
Yeah.
And I go back to the drawing board. Like, do you have any advice? Should I just push through with that, or do you think?
Oh, push. Like the thing about it is if you're getting better while you're working on stuff, awesome. If you hate your stuff and think you can do it better, awesome. That is amazing. That's the coolest thing. When you get to the point where you're laying there and you're going, man, my navel looks awesome, and I am never going to get better than this right here, then just get a job bartending or something like that. So that's cool, but what you need to do is produce it. Just go through it, just produce it, and all that awesome that you're feeling, put that into the next project, you know, and then the next project, and then the next project. But everyone who wants to do this seriously, they're getting better while they're doing it. You know, and when I get like, what I have a tendency of doing is I'm going to lay out the entire story, just in thumbnails. And after I'm finished with the entire story, just in thumbnails, then I'm gonna go and I'm gonna draw the entire story. But I'm gonna start on page 1, and then go to page 2, 3, 4, until I'm finished. You know, the worst thing that you can do is go through and eat all the bowls of ice cream. And then only have broccoli left, you know, so at the end of the project. You know, so I like working straight through, because as I get better, that means the work gets better as I move through the project. You know, so if you're having problems kind of finishing, more than likely that means you're getting better. And what you should do is be crazy excited about that, and just be desperate to finish what you're on, so that you can get to the next thing, which is going to be even more awesome than what you're working on now. All right?
Perfect.
All right, well, thank you folks for showing up.